Hello everybody and welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be taking a look at the 2022 roster for the Atlanta Reign. This team finished 5th in the overall season in 2021, though they did finish 2nd in the playoffs as the runner-ups in the grand finals, losing to the Shanghai Dragons. So a good playoff performance from them and a pretty strong season for them. No tournament wins or finals appearances outside of the grand finals, but still a very strong season, led primarily by the power of Pelican, the Rookie of the Year for 2021. But going into 2022, this roster has gone in a pretty different direction, and this team is looking very different from what we saw in 2021. So let's jump in and take a look at this team and who they have on this roster. So let's throw it up on the screen real quick. You can see Ultraviolet there at the bottom in the inactive section, but that's just because he's underage. He'll be, 18 by the time the season starts. But in the DPS side, we have Kai, Nero, and Venom. Kai, of course, returning from last season. Nero coming over from the San Francisco Shock, and Venom being a rookie for this team. Support line, we have OG and Ultraviolet, 2 rookie players, and in the tank line, we have Gator and Hawk, 2 returning veterans. So let's start with this DPS lineup. Obviously, no Pelican anymore. Been traded to the Houston Outlaws for the 2022 season, so Kai is the big man returning to this team. Of course, Edison gone as well. Joining the Dallas Fuel, as we talked about a few videos ago. So Kai is really the kind of superstar DPS player on this team now. Had a very good run with the LA Valiant, had a very good run with the Atlanta Reign in 2021, and now coming into 2022. For what it's worth, in my opinion, one of the most mechanically skilled hit scan players in the league. One of the best hit scan players in general. An incredibly talented player who knows, how to aim super well, has really smart game sense, is almost always in the right place in the right time. Very, very, very good player. And I think when it comes to just pure talent, might be the most talented DPS player on this roster. Obviously, he's not the most versatile player. He doesn't have the most diverse hero pool. He plays hit scan. He's a sniper player. He's going to be your Ashe, your Widow, your Cassidy. Plays some Hanzo as well, so you know what you're getting out of Kai, but what you're getting out of him is one of the most accurate and dangerous players to come up against in the server, because he just does not miss, and he can turn fights, really. He can honestly enter a fight and just turn the game in his favor, and that is a really, really, really big part of why I think Kai is such a good player, is that he has that ability, which you don't see a lot in players. There's very rarely kind of that level of talented player where they just have this just incredibly high talent and high game sense that just allows them to just take over matches and take over moments. And Kai is one of those players. So when you have one of the most talented DPS players in Kai, and you pair him with a player like Nero, who I think is a good signing, because Nero is a very flexible player. He can play your Pharah and your Mei and your Echo and your flex DPS. That's kind of his wheelhouse. Of course, played for the Guangzhou Charge back in 2019 and 2020, and then played last season for the San Francisco Shock. So he had a pretty good run last season. It wasn't the best, but overall he had a good run on the San Francisco Shock. And he is going to be a very consistent flex DPS player who can play pretty much anything you're going to need out of Nero, right? Anything they need him to play, he can play. And I think that gives them a ton of flexibility to the DPS role. He'll be the Pelican replacement. Now those are some really big shoes to fill. And he had some big shoes to fill when he joined the Shock, replacing Rascal. But he's still a very good player, and he has a lot of talent, and someone who I think that can definitely step into those big moments and fill those shoes. I think a lot of people are really critical of Nero during his time with the Shock. I actually think Nero was arguably the best DPS player they had last season, especially after Striker left. I think Nero was the most consistent. He never really struggled, in my opinion. He wasn't like a liability or anything like that. I think, it's difficult to shine when you're replacing one of the best players from the team's history in Rascal, but Nero was still a very good player, and I think that he is a strong candidate when it comes to kind of top flex DPS players coming out of the West. And you want to talk about best American DPS players, Nero's up there, so definitely, in my opinion, a very good person for this roster, and someone who I expect to be one of the top performers in the league when you pair him with Kai. And the third and final DPS player is Venom. Now, Venom is a Tracer specialist. That is really what he is known for. Yes, Nero can play the Tracer, but that is what Venom's bread and butter is. He is an incredible Tracer. He formerly went by the name Sigma. I've talked about him in the past when the Dallas Fuel were looking for a hit scan player. He was someone who I talked about, like maybe he'll join the Dallas Fuel. Obviously he didn't, but now he's coming out and he is joining the Atlanta Reign, and he is going to be their main Tracer player. You can also play your Cassidy's and your Hanzo, so I would expect him to probably split time mostly with Nero in double hit scan types of compositions, where if they need like Tracer Cassidy or Tracer Ash, something like that, is where I think Venom would probably play mostly. He'll probably be a Tracer in those types of situations. Or if you need, Cassidy Widow, Cassidy Ash. That's where I think he would probably get most of his playtime. Now, Nero could be their Tracer player at some of those times. But to me, you don't sign Venom if you don't want his Tracer player or his Tracer play, because it is exceptional. It's one of the best in the league, so or one of the best we've seen in contenders recently. So definitely Venom, one of those players that I think has the capability and the potential to be among the top kind of Tracer players, especially when I think there's kind of an opening now, right? Who knows how Striker is going to look with the Uprising now. He's not on that potentially carry position that he's been in with the Shock for so long, where he kind of looked super good all the time. And we know Yaki looks good as well. But it'll be interesting to kind of see how Venom stacks up now with some of these other elite Tracer players we've seen over the past couple of seasons. Of course, last season, we saw Pelican and Kevster look really, really good on the role, so it'll be interesting to see what the Reign do with Venom, but I would say the majority of the season will probably be Kai and Nero. That gives you the most flexibility, and Kai is just such a talented player who you don't want to really have on the bench very often, because he is just that good of a hit scan player and that good of a sniper that you want him on the team as much as possible, because he is genuinely that good. I'm not like gassing up Kai for like unfounded reasons. I think Kai is one of the best DPS players in the league, hands down, and he just doesn't get the credit that I think he should sometimes. So that's really where I am on Kai as a player. And this DPS lineup I think is really, really good, and I think is still an elite level DPS line. Obviously, losing Pelican hurts this DPS line a lot. You're losing somebody who just had incredible carry potential. And as much as I think Kai is a carry caliber player, he's not what Pelican was, where Pelican was just that dominant. So it'll be interesting to see how this team bounces back with this new lineup. But I think it's very solid. I think it runs pretty well, and it covers pretty much everything they would need to cover. So all in all, I think it is still a pretty strong DPS lineup. Let's move on, though, to the part of this roster that I am most excited for going into 2022, and that is the support line. Now, in the last video, I talked about Reiner, who played for American Tornado previously. OG and Ultraviolet are other players who have been around and have been on some of those really, really good teams over the past several years in Contenders. If you go to OG's Wikipedia page and you look at what he has done since 2019, okay? 2019 Contender Season 2, he was on XL2 Academy. They got second in the Western North American Contenders. And then Contenders 2020 Season 1, North America, first. The September Season 2, first. November for Season 2, first. North American Gauntlet, first. Contenders 2021, Season 1 in March, second. Contenders 21 NA Season 1, April, 1st. Contenders 2021 NA Season 2, June, 1st. Contenders 2021 NA Season 2, July, 1st. I mean, this is a player who has just everywhere he has been, which was American Tornado, he won. OG and Ultraviolet both have been winning since 2020, especially. If you want to look at Ultraviolet, he has a bunch of those same tournament results because they played together on American Tornado. Ultraviolet did move on to Redbird Esports, where they won both September and October of Contenders 2021 NA Season 3. So these are some really good support players. These are the best of support players come out of America, the U.S. in a very, very long time. These are players who, especially OG, have been kind of hyped up for a very, very long time. OG is somebody who has been on the radar for a long time, obviously. 2019, he was doing well in XL2. So even before that, he was a well-known player. And finally is of age to compete in the Overwatch League. He was too young for a very long time. But now he is old enough and is gonna be a very, very big name player going into this season. One of the players who you were just waiting for, right? Much like we saw in the last video talking about Pattyfon, that is the type of player we're talking about here with OG. That level of player where he is just, we have been waiting for him to come of age for so long, and he is finally old enough to be in the Overwatch League, and probably in the best environment he could have been on, with a team that I think will be very, very good. And he is going to play alongside the support player he has been playing with for the past, year, basically, alongside Ultraviolet. So, it's more than a year, really. So this is a really good signing for both of these teams, right? We know OG can play all the supports. He can play Lucio, he can play Mercy, he can play Brig, he can play some BAP. So if you need that double flex support compositions with, BAP Ana or BAP Zen, you can get that with OG and Ultraviolet. This is a team that I think is in a really good position. Obviously, Iris and Moss had very good seasons last season. I think the problem with Iris is that outside of his Batiste, he wasn't really the most high skill, high potential flex support player. And when you're trying to build a roster where you just need those two support players, you don't need to sub out, there is that issue of you can't really run Zen comps, you can't really run Ana comps very well because Iris just wasn't as comfortable in those heroes as he is on Batiste. That's not really a problem with Ultraviolet. Ultraviolet can play all of them, and he can play them at a very high level. And so you're getting a very good player on all those roles. And if you need a BAP player, you can have OG do that. So I look at this team, or this support line, and I think it's exceptional. These are two proven players, even if, yes, they're proven in Contenders, they're not proven yet in OWL. I still think they are really, really good, and I think that they are some of the best support players in the world right now, considering their pedigree and their history of just winning games year in and year out, tournament after tournament after tournament. We have been waiting for so long for this team and these players to finally get onto the Overwatch League stage, finally join Overwatch League teams, and now they're here, and they're together, which I think is a really big part of their success. This will make it so much easier for both of them to succeed as players because they are paired with people that they already know, and they're paired with players that they feel comfortable with. And so that to me is a really big part of why I'm excited about this team, because they have pieces that I know are good and that we've seen work well together. And I think that that helps them mesh pretty well as you kind of slot them into this roster. Replacing two players that had very good seasons last season, I feel confident in their ability to kind of elevate this roster beyond where it was last season. But the final part of this roster is the tank line, which is completely unchanged. It is still Gator and Hawk. Of course, only one tank going into Overwatch 2 and going into the 2022 season of the Overwatch League, so who knows for sure how the breakdown is going to be between Gator and Hawk. But you're covered. You know, Gator can play the Rhine and the Orisa and the Winston and the Wrecking Ball. He can even play some Sigma. Obviously, he's most comfortable in Rhine and Orisa, and that's the way that the Rain have been comfortable playing in the past, but he can play those other heroes should you need it. And you know that Hawk can play the Diva and the Zarya and the Hog and the Sigma, so I like what this team has in terms of flexibility. I think they have a lot of really great coverage on this team. I think they look very, very good. I think it'll be difficult for them to reach the same level of success they had last season for a couple of different reasons. Obviously, they have that same solid tank line they had last season, which is really helpful. Tank lines are very important to be successful in the Overwatch League. That has kind of been one of the keys we've seen over time, is if your tank line is kind of a mess, you're not going to be very good. And even teams that have really, really good players have and have been pretty good, when their tank line begins to kind of go away from their comforts, they start to look bad. Look at the Dallas Fuel last season, right? They were really, really good, really talented roster. But down the stretch, they just started to kind of fall apart because they weren't really able to play the meta very well, because Fearless's tank line or tank hero pool was not as good as a lot of the other teams and some of the other tanks who could play pretty much anything. And so that definitely, in my opinion, was an issue for some teams down the stretch last season. Thankfully, I don't think that is going to be a problem with this Rain team. So that's one of the things I think is very good with this team, is they have a solid core in that tank line and a support line that I genuinely believe in. I think this is a really good support line and a strong DPS line. The problem that I have with this team, and the reason why I think it'll be difficult for them to match the same level of success they had last season, is two main factors. Number one is they have lost Pelican, and Pelican was such an important part of this team last season. He was an incredibly talented player, obviously Rookie of the Year last season. It will be difficult for Nero, despite how good Nero is, to fill those shoes, because Pelican just was so different last season. He was transcendent the way that he played. And so I have concerns for that reason, that they're going to struggle to match what they were last season because of that. The other concern I have is that the coaching staff is not going to have Hunter this season, who I felt was very, very good for this team last season, a really important part of this team last season. He felt, based on what we kind of saw from the way the team played and the way that interviews were conducted and handled, he was a very important part of this team's success. He was really, really big for the team and how well they performed. So I feel as though losing Hunter is pretty big and is something that I am concerned about. And I think that it is worth talking about and worth mentioning that it is concerning to see a really good player and a really good coach depart your team. And I think that could have massive kind of rippling effects on this team and the way that this team develops in a way over time. And we'll have to see if the coaching staff can keep up. You know, how important was Hunter to the success of this team? It seems like it was pretty big from what we've seen and what we've heard, but maybe what we'll find out is the team is still going to be just as good as they were last season. And these new pieces are going to elevate this team. But I find it difficult to sit here right now today and to tell you that I think this Atlanta Reign team is going to be as good as they were last season. As much as I love what they've done to their roster, they exceeded expectations last season. I thought that they played above what they were expected to be. I think a big part of that was because of Unter's strategic coaching. And so I am interested to see what happens. Obviously, the coach that they do have, the assistant coach they have, I believe his name is Danny, is someone who's been with the team for a long time. Since Seffi joined back in 2018, he was like a video guy who kind of like handled stats and stuff, or kind of like was like the film guy. So now he's an assistant coach, and so he's been with the team for a while. He's learned and he's evolved as a coach. So I think that it'll be interesting to see this team. It's one of my favorite teams this season, and one of the most interested in seeing, just because of the, pretty much all in nature on this American roster, with the exception of Kai and Venom, who are, of course, British and Korean, respectively. So it'll be interesting to see. I think it's an interesting roster. I think it's a fun roster. I think it's one of the most intriguing rosters on paper, and one that I'm definitely curious to see how they perform. When we get into Overwatch 2, I think they are going to be one of the enemies and villains of the Overwatch League season, because that's what they've been for the past 2 years, really, and I think that's something they're going to keep going. So let me know your thoughts in the comments down below on this Reign roster. I'd love to hear from you. I have a lot of really interesting mixed thoughts on this team. I kind of bounce back between they're going to be really good and they're going to underperform what they did last season pretty significantly, just because I think competition's better, but also I don't know what to expect. This team's interesting to me. One of the ones I'm definitely interested to see kind of that first weekend of play for them, how they look, because I think they'll look better. Or my opinion on the team, whether I think they look better or worse, is not going to really be able to be determined until we get to see them in action. So I'm curious to see them in action, excited to see them in action, and so I'd love to hear from you and your thoughts on this team. If you agree with that and you think that they're a team that looks pretty good, if you think they're a team that looks kind of mediocre, and if you're excited for these new pieces, I'm super excited for OG, a player I'm very excited for. Been waiting for him for a while, so incredibly excited to see him. That's going to be all from me for today. If you enjoyed this video and would like it in the future, consider liking and subscribing. But that's going to be all from me for today. Hope you're all staying safe and staying healthy. And until next time, bye-bye.